Hello. This is our lecture video on apportionment. So the current module we're working on is apportionment, and we've got 2 weeks to work on it. And here is me doing some examples. You can see how I do it. Okay, so first of all, let's just talk a little bit about what apportionment is, right? It's just the apportionment is how you divide up a fixed number of things among groups of different sizes, right? So like that's in politics, right? We need to say like how many representatives does each state have, right? That's you apportioning those representatives to the states. Apportionment is like giving a portion to each group. And of course, in the states themselves, right, they have another apportionment issue, which is, like, because so in the federal government, right, there are senators and representatives, right, and the representatives are based on how much population is in the state, right, but then within the states themselves, they have other representatives, and like each district has its own representative. And so there is a problem in like how do you define the districts, and how they do that changes all the time. I personally find it kind of confusing. If you read about it online, I always walk away from reading something with more questions than I started with. All right, but let's talk about ways that have been used to do the apportionment in the federal government, and like the actual methods about how they do it. So first of all, there's some rules, and these are kind of common sense rules, right? So obviously, right, the things being divided up can only exist in whole numbers, because we're just talking about like people, right? Like we want, California to have a certain number of representatives. It can't have a portion of a representative, because a representative is a person, right? So you can't give a state like, 12.9 things. So everything's whole numbers, which is actually kind of tricky, because if you try and find, just do some division to see like how many, each state should have, you're probably going to end up getting some decimals. And so that's what these methods are all about, kind of controlling those decimals. So they have to be whole numbers. You have to use everything, right? Like if you want to have 435 representatives, all 435 representatives have to be given a place, right? You're not going to have any left over that you just don't use. Each group must get at least one thing, right? So even if you're doing your mathematical method and it turns out that some group is, supposed to be like they have less than one representative they should be getting, they actually have to get a representative, right? Like you can't have a group that doesn't have anything in it. And it makes sense, right? Especially if you think about like in terms of the government and the representatives, like you can't have a state that doesn't have anybody representing it. That would not be right. And then the number of things assigned to each group should be at least approximately proportional, right? So like the group is bigger, then they get more representatives. I guess that kind of makes sense, right? Depending on maybe what your focus is. Oftentimes, right, exact proportionality isn't possible, because then you maybe wouldn't be able to do whole numbers, right? Like if you had, I don't know, if you had 10 things to apportion and 3 groups to apportion them to, you can't evenly divide them with whole numbers, right? Not every group can get you can't have 10 things divided by 3. It's just not an even. It doesn't go in evenly, right? You have this decimal part. So and so what that also means is that, right, if one group is larger than the other, then the larger group should get more representatives. Okay. All right, so here's some information. Oh, I'm trying to draw on the page. And here, I'm going to leave these up here. So those apportionment rules, notice they were using words like things and groups. So that's kind of a general thing. In my mind, I always think about the United States House of Representatives when I think about apportionment, though you can use apportionment for other things, right? So in the United States House of Representatives, you can see right, you can't, a state can only have a whole number of representatives. You can't have 3.4. That's the right, the first apportionment rule. There are 430 representatives available. all of those representatives have to be apportioned, right? You're not going to have one over there. And so an interesting point about that is that if one state gets another representative, then another state has to lose one, because you can't add more. I mean, I guess you could, but you'd have to do like an amendment, right? But so you only have 435. So if some states quota, there's a fancy word, increases, right, and they need another representative, you have to take it from another state. So you'd reapportion. And you'll see how that works in practice when we do the examples. Every state has to get at least one representative, no matter how small. And of course, the number of representatives should be approximately proportional to the state population. So like we said, bigger states should have more representatives. Because I'm thinking right now that when you do that, right, then you give more of a voice to more people, it seems like, right? I mean, like, so you have like a giant state like California, with, I don't know how many people are in California right now, millions, right? And then a very small state. What's the smallest state that I can think of? Like Maine is pretty small, right? If those states had the same number of representatives, they would have equal voice, but they would represent very different numbers of people. And so I think that this proportional thing is almost like, you give more voice to more people, as long as the representatives are actually reflecting the wishes of their people, which hopefully they do. But all right. Oh, and here is an interesting graphic. This was based on the 2020 census, right? So when populations change, right, they do the census every 10 years. This is showing which states gained some representatives, right? They call them seats. Which states stayed the same, and who lost. So see, the purple ones, all of those states lost one seat. And so if you add those up, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 states lost a seat. There should be 7 new seats in the other states. So let's see, the dark green is 2 seats. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There you go. It matches up, right? If 7 states lost a seat, then 7 seats had to be apportioned. Texas apparently was growing very quickly. They had 2 extra seats. Okay. So let's talk about another rule called the quota rule. All right. So the quota rule states that the final number of representatives a state gets should be within one of the state's quota, right? So what they're saying within so if the state's quota was, say, I don't know, 35.3, right? Then they should either get 35 or 36, right? You shouldn't go further away than 1 from their quota. Now you might be saying, what the heck is the quota, right? Well, the quota, we're going to talk about it more, but quickly here, the quota is basically the number that represents how many representatives a state should have, right, based on the total population divided by the number of representatives. Typically that's a decimal, right? So you get that quota, it's a decimal value. That can't be your actual apportionment. So then you have to have some method of dealing with those decimals, and that's what all these apportionment methods are going to talk about. Okay. And so quota rule is not a law, but it's a good idea. Some people think that we should stay with it. Now, does that mean that these other apportionment rules are laws? Well, no, I think if they were laws, they'd be saying that, but they're rules. Maybe some of them are built in. I don't know. Okay, let's see. All right, so Hamilton's method, that's the first one we're going to talk about. And I think I'll do Hamilton's method on this video and then stop. So Alexander Hamilton, we all know who he is, right? There was a very popular musical just in the past couple of years that came out about him. He proposed this method in 1791, right? But apparently President Washington vetoed it. But then later, in 1852, Congress actually used it for quite a while, 1852 to 1911. That's a long time. That's more than 50 years. All right, so let's see how Hamilton's method works here. Okay, so first, you determine how many people each representative should represent, right? So you do that very simply. You take the population of the whole country, right? So all the states added together, the entire population, and you divide it by the number of representatives, right? So if you take your total and divide it by, so this is total population, right? And you divide it by number of representatives, right? That'll tell you how many people per representative, right? So you're saying, okay, given how many people we have and how many representatives we have, each representative should represent this many people, right? And that number is called the divisor. And you'll see it's called the divisor because in the next step, we're going to divide by it, right? So, you're going to divide. So that's why it's called a divisor, right? So that is the divisor. Then you go to each state, right? And you take a particular state's population and you divide it by the divisor, right? And that will tell you how many representatives that state should have, at least in like a very raw form, right? This will certainly be a decimal, right? And that number is called the quota. Right, so you take your state population and you divide it by your divisor, and that is the quota. I didn't label this one here. Divisor, and that is your quota. So it's a rough estimate of how many representatives that state should have. Now the problem is you can't, we know you can't give states fractional representatives. So how do you deal with that? And Hamilton's method says this is how we're going to do it. So you take all the quotas and you just get rid of all the decimals, right? Don't forget them. You have to keep track of them, but you got to just get rid of them and have a list of just the whole numbers, right? So those are then called the lower quotas, because if you take a decimal, like say 31.345, right? And you just get rid of the decimal part, right? The number you're left with is always going to be smaller than the number with the decimals, because the decimal part has some value, right? So if you get rid of that, you're always going to have a lower number. That's why it's called the lower quota. All right, so then every state has a lower quota once you drop their decimals. You add all those up, and if that happens to equal all the number of representatives, you're good. Everybody gets their lower quota and you're done. However, this will not be equal to the number of representatives because you've chopped off the decimal on each of them. So I don't even know why I said that. Because all these decimal parts were in there. You took the this population of the state, divided it by the divisor. You got a number plus some. Hold on, my computer did something weird. So it's always going to be lower than the total number of representatives. So then what do you do with those? Okay. Now, I mean, I guess I lied. It's possible, like if maybe the numbers, maybe the divisor happens to be an actual divisor of the state's population, right? If your state's population was 1,000 and your divisor was, I don't know, 50 goes into 1,000. So it's possible that maybe that happened for all the states, but very unlikely. So assuming that did not happen, that when you add up all the lower quotas, you're not using all the representatives yet. So what you're going to do is start assigning representatives to the states whose decimal parts of the quota were largest, right? So what does that mean? Say you only had 3 states, and say their quotas were 29.541 and 31 point, I'm going to do the 3, 4, 5 again, and another one was 33.976, right? So say those were your 2 quotas, right? So the lower quotas are 29, 31, and 31. If you had, say, a leftover representative, right, you would look to see whose decimal part was the largest. So in my made-up example here, the 33.976, the 976 is the largest decimal part, so they would get that extra, that leftover representative, right? And if you had 2 leftover representatives, you would give one to these people and then the second one to this people, because it has the second largest, right? So you use the lower quotas and then you start assigning the ones that you haven't used to the states whose decimal parts were largest, right? So not too bad. Shall we do an example? Let me see. Do I have more than? Okay, no, just one example. All right, so I'm gonna, yeah, I'll start here because I got to know what I'm doing. I'm reading down here. Example 2. A small country consists of 5 states. Okay, so we've got a very simplified scenario here, whose populations are listed below. So you can see that state A has 810,000, state B has 473,000, state C has 292,000, state D has 594,000, and state E has 211,000. Okay. So just like looking at that, we see that state A is the largest. So once we apportion, state A should have at least as many as anybody else, if not more, right? And the smallest one is state E. So they should have the smallest number of representatives. Okay, so we want to apportion the seats according to Hamilton's method, and there are 119 of them. Okay, so we got to give all these people 119 seats. All right, so the first step, I'm reading up here. Determine how many people each representative should represent. Do this by dividing the total population by the total number of representatives. Okay, so the total number of representatives in this case is 119, right? The total population we're not given. We actually have to find that by adding up all the, because we're only given the population for each state. So we've got to calculate total population here. Total population, add up population of all states. All right, I'm going to use a calculator, which means I think I have to come out of full screen mode and bring up my calculator here. Okay, if I move this over here, can I see them all? Yes, indeed. Okay, so I'm going to add up 810,000. I meant to do plus 473,000 plus 292,000 plus, oh, I hit enter again, plus 594,000 plus 211,000. All right, so that looks to me like 2,380,000. Well, let me write that down. 2,380,000. All right, does that seem reasonable? Okay, I did take a minute to check my work and just add it again to make sure, and that I got the same answer. So that's probably good. So that's our total population. That's 2,380,000, and that is what we're going to call, that's the divisor. Okay. So sometimes if you look, some books are going to call it D. Let's call it D. That's our divisor. All right, so that's step 1. So that number is the divisor. Stop it. Stop it. Hey, stop it. What is happening here? Okay, so that is the number. So given that our entire wait, is that the divisor? Oh, no, that's just the total. Oh my gosh. Hello, Kelly. No, that's just our total population. That's not the divisor. Now we have to divide that total population. I don't know what I'm thinking. Hey, my gosh. Like, that's very annoying to me. And now look, now the screen is doing a weird thingy. Sometimes it does this. It's like the keyboard, it thinks the keyboard is still there. I don't know how to stop that from happening. Look at that. How do I get rid of that? Hold on, I'm going to pause the. Okay, I actually had to close the program I'm using and reopen it. It would not show the whole thing. Okay, so yeah, so I was thinking ahead of myself, this is not the divisor. Hopefully when I said that, you were like, what are you talking about? Because this is just the total population, right? The divisor is going to be the total population divided by the number of seats that we have to apportion. Okay, so let's write that down. So the divisor equals the total population. So that's 2,380,000 divided by the 119 seats. right? So that's going to divide up the entire population into groups of 100 of size 119. So how many is that? Let's see. I'm just going to use my regular calculator instead of exiting full screen again. Hopefully that's okay. So 2,380,000 divided by 119. Ooh, I got exactly 20,000. I wonder if that was rigged. I guess it makes sense, though. I mean, all these populations, they have these 3 zeros at the end, so it kind of makes sense that it's going to be. But I bet 119 was carefully chosen so that we got a nice divisor. Okay. So that is telling us that each representative should be representing 20,000 people, right? So that's the divisor. Okay. Now we need to use that divisor to determine each state's quota. Okay. And we do that by dividing each state's population by the divisor. And that's going to be our quota, and we should record that number to several decimal places. Okay, I am going to come full screen because I do want to use my calculator here where you can see it. Okay, so we're going to take each state's population and divide it by that divisor. All right, I don't have enough room here. Okay, oh, all right, so let's just do it. So state A, our population is 810,000 divided by that divisor, 20,000. All right, let's do it. So 810, 1, 2, 3, divided by 20, not 21, 20, 1, 2, 3. 40.5. Okay, so state A's quota is 40.5. I'm going to write that right here. 40.5. Is that okay? Does that make sense? And yes, that's a 4 and that's a 4. I write my 4s in 2 different ways. Sometimes people are like, well, how can those both be 4s? But okay, so that's state A's quota. Let's do B's. So B had 473,000 people. You divide that by 119. 473, 1, 2, 3, not 119. My brain is not working. The divisor. Man, you know, sometimes it's true. Sometimes my brain does not function as smoothly as other days, but you know, you still got to work, right? Divided by 20,000. 23.65. I'm just going to write it up here. 23.65. Okay, that's A's quota, that's B's quota. C's quota, C's population is 292,000. You divide that by the divisor, 20,000. That's a 0. All right, 292, 1, 2, 3, divided by 20, 1, 2, 3, 13.1. Okay, 13.1. I like it. All right, we got 2 more. State D. Their population is 594,000. You divide that by 20,000. What do you get? 594, 1, 2, 3, divided by 20, 1, 2, 3. 29.7. 29.7. These are nice decimals, right? I like that they don't have like 9 decimal places after them. So I'm just writing all the decimals. If they had a lot of them, I would probably carry each one out to at least 3 decimal places. I feel like 3 should be enough, right? Okay, and then finally, state E. Their population was 211,000, and that gets divided by 20,000. So 211, 1, 2, 3. Divided by 20, 1, 2, 3, 10.55. 10.55. All right, so those are the quotas for each state. right? I'm going to put boxes around them. Can I put boxes around them? We'll put one box. Those are the quotas. Okay, now what do we do with the quotas? Okay, so now we cut off all the decimals. So let's just look, so let's do lower quotas. So I think I might come over here and I'm going to just make a list of the lower quotas. So lower quotas, A would be 40, right? B would be 23. So I'm just ignoring the decimal part. C would be 13. D would be 29. And E would be 10. Now, if we add those all up, do we get, how close are we to 119? So we have to add them up to see, because, I mean, maybe it's perfect. Probably not. So here, let me move this over. Stop it. Okay, so we're going to add 40 plus, Jesus, 40 plus 23 plus 13 plus 29 plus 10. 40, 23, 13, 29, 10. Okay, 115. All right, so we have 4 seats that we haven't apportioned. So right now, right, A gets 40. B gets 23, C gets 13, D gets 29, and E gets 10, but we have 4 more to give out. So 4 is less than the number of states. So 4 of these states are going to get extra seats, right? Because we have 5 states, but we have 4 to give. So notice how the rules up here say, right, assign the remaining representatives 1 each to the states whose decimal parts are the largest, right? So you don't give more than 1. I mean, if we had, say, if we had a bunch of extra ones, we could give them to more, but that probably won't happen. Okay, so let's look at the decimal portions of our numbers here. Who has the largest decimal point? It's got to be D right here, right? With 0.7. 0.7 is bigger than any other one. So D is going to get an additional, so we're going to add 1 to D. And who is the next state with the largest, the next largest? 0.5. So let's, oh, no, 0.65. This is bigger than any other states. Okay, so B is going to get another seat. And now let's look at the next one. So notice how state A has 0.5. But state E has 0.55. So the question is, which one of those is larger? Is 0.5 larger than 0.55? So if you think about the decimal places, right, the decimal place right after the decimal point, that's the tens place. And I said tens, I meant tenths, the 10th place. So each of these numbers have 5 tenths, right? Well, A has now 0 hundredths, right? Because the next place is the hundredths place. So A has 0 hundredths because there was not a digit there, but E has 5 hundredths. So E 0.55 is a larger number than 0.5 because 0.5 is 5 hundredths plus nothing. And 0.55 is 5 hundredths is, sorry, I can't, my freaking brain. 0.5 is 5 tenths plus nothing. Right, and 0.55 is 5 tenths plus 5 hundredths, so it's more. So then E gets that extra seat, is the next one. And that's only 3, we need 1 more, so then it would go to A, right, because 0.5 is definitely bigger than 0.1, so then A gets another extra seat. So our final totals are A gets 41, B gets 24, C gets 13, D gets 30, and E gets 11. Now, just to double check, does that actually add up to 119? 41 plus 24 plus 13 plus 30 plus 11. Indeed. So we have now apportioned the 119 seats of the legislature of this small country to the 5 states according to Hamilton's method. Okay, so I'm going to stop it here and we'll make another video about Jefferson's method and then maybe probably another video about the 3rd method. I think, is it just 3 or 4 methods? I can never remember. But I will see you soon. Hopefully this helped.